I'm totally excited for today's webinar.
I'm
It's like
excited.
it's
Gonna be
like
good. Gonna be
it's
good.
water everywhere, at least virtually. I'm really excited today about the webinar, which is all about fluid effects in Houdini and how the main set piece of the project, the flood, came together. Well, you guys ready to start? Because I'm ready to start.
Yeah, good.
So,
All right, guys, let's do this. All right. Welcome, webinar attendees. My name is Frank Cordero, and I'm the host of today's webinar. For those who don't know me already, I'm a former cleanup animator from Disney, former concept and art director at EA, freelance 2D, 3D artist, and currently doing content marketing for CG Master Academy. Today's webinar is going to be an exciting one indeed. We are excited to have our CGMA audience meet two talented artists and instructors, Ed Ferrysienanda and Phillip Engström. Hope I got that last name.
Yeah, it's
pronounced.
all good. All good.
It's a challenge. It's always a
Yeah.
challenge.
Get
All
some
right.
funny letters in there. It's all good.
Yeah. So these guys are going to be sharing some cool insights about their experiences in creating the effects for Houdini Production Studio Fluid Effects. It's a groundbreaking masterclass at CGMA. Today's webinar is sponsored by CG Master Academy. All right, CG Master Academy is the leader in online digital arts education in art, VFX, games, and now animation. CGMA always strives to offer artists the highest quality education through the most affordable, accessible, and relevant courses in the world. As a team founded by artists, for artists, we are committed to enabling you to become a better artist by learning from the industry's best. All right. And speaking of the industry's best, all right, let's get to some introductions here. All right. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Edward Ferrysienanda. And I promise I'm going to get it right by the end.
Nice.
Oh, the grace in that, I tell you, man. Ed is currently a lead effects TD at Framestore London, having worked on some of the biggest VFX houses such as Double Negative and MPC. Ed brings years of production experience and expert knowledge to the table. He's worked on a variety of exciting projects, such as the Oscar-winning Jungle Book, Suicide Squad, Thor, Ragnarok, Alita Battle Angel, The Mandalorian, and many, many more. Dude, you're a rock star, dude. All right. Another rock star that's following up here. All right. Is we've got Phillip Engström, lighting supervisor at Important Looking Pirates. I love the name of that company. That's an amazing name for a company, by the way.
It's an amazing name and an amazing game.
Wow. Okay. Well, he's been on cool stuff as well. He's the lighting supervisor there, and he's done work on films like, can I mention it at least? Or can I not mention it? I'll say Suicide Squad, Lost in Space, and VS, which is, by the way, a VSE award nominee. And then he's also worked on shows like Carnival Row, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and Westworld. And working currently on a movie that rhymes with Patrix.
Subtle. I like it.
So anyway, all right. So you guys, how are you guys doing, by the way?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, just want to give them a very warm welcome. So before we get started, all right, to our attendees in the webinar today, please put your questions in the dedicated part of the Q&A of the chat. I'll do our best to get to as many questions as time allows, especially towards the end when we actually have the Q&A. You know what? I'm just going to start with this. How the heck are you both? I mean, you guys are in a different time zone. And so this is like, nighttime for you. You should be having, a cocktail or a beer. So what are you doing right now that you could, what's going on with you guys right now?
Doing good. So just finished work about an hour ago, maybe an hour and a half ago. It's Friday and we have bank holiday on Monday, or like a day off on Monday basically. So looking forward for a bit of a break, really. So yeah, it's good. And I don't know if you can see, I've got drink set up behind me. So after the webinar, that's where I'm going.
What about you, Phil?
Yeah, all good. Just finished. We ordered some Indian takeaways. Cruising on that wave for now. I'm currently working for ILP, and that's in Sweden, but I'm currently living in the UK. So I have like double time zone difference right now because I get off work at 5 UK time. So it's like, so it's a
Nice.
mess.
Well, good to kind of meet you both a little bit, and I'm really excited about your presentation today. Today, the title of the webinar, I'm going to go back to the first slide just so that you kind of can see that, is Houdini Production Studio, Fluid Effects, all right? And we're definitely excited to hear what you guys had to say to kind of invite VFX, artists to step up their game and, really get involved with fluids. And I understand that you're going to be showing off some of your work in preparation for delivering this class. Is that correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
maybe we can start playing with the trailer in case people.
Okay. How about this? Why don't you run and take over on that? Cool.
Sure.
Right.
Let's give it a go.
Try to resist the urge to bounce. I can't resist. Sorry, I'm bopping my head. Holy smokes. That is unbelievable, man.
Nice.
Before we get into the project, I wanted to, if you could tell us a little bit about yourselves, because it's always an interesting road to talk to artists in the entertainment, design, and production business about a little bit about how you got there, what kind of lit the flame for choosing this as a career, where you went to school, and, how you developed your skills so that somebody said, hey, man, this guy's good. So cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was a bit of an unusual journey because I'm basically originally from Indonesia, and growing up, we always watch movies and go to cinemas and all that stuff. But we were so far removed from the industry. Like growing up, I didn't even know it was a job. It's just something that you see in the cinema. It just kind of happens and it just comes out, right? But I got the opportunity basically to go to the UK to study, and in my foundation year, I found out, oh, actually, you can do this because, in the past 10, 15 years, London has been a kind of like a VFX hub since, the Harry Potter came about, right? And that kind of exposed me to this whole world of possibilities. And I'm like, holy smokes, you can do this. So, I went all in and, as they say, the rest is kind of history.
How about you, Phil?
Well, I mean, I started studying photography at a university down in Gothenburg in southern parts of Sweden. And I started my sort of media career, or whatever you want to call it, as a retouching artist, and I did that for about 2 years. And I always felt like I was kind of missing something in my creative toolkit, and figured, well, it's 3D CG. And then I found this university in the northern parts of Sweden that they had a program that offered just that specific toolkit. And I just decided to go for it. Managed to land an internship at ILP, and been there for a bit over a decade. Came to Framestore, which I came to Framestore during the whole working from home COVID situation. So, I mean, we worked on the same project, but I haven't actually met you in person, which is
I
kind of
know,
weird.
right? It's
We've been
crazy.
speaking with each other for about a year now, but
Yeah, which
it's funny.
speaks to the new reality of studios without walls and all
Yes.
sorts of shenanigans happening in our business because of COVID.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's I think it's in some places it's probably changed forever. So I mean, in other places, I think people are going to be hankering to come back to what I call water cooler conversations in the occasional hallway break, and just feeling like they're part of a group of artists, and then actually being able to see and hear them in person. So we're there. I think we're there. I think it's nice to see the signs of life coming back. So. But I think the studio without walls, I think it's here to stay.
No, for sure. Like even
I think so.
I don't know if we can say this, but like even at work, the culture is kind of changing. We're starting to even hire people completely remote. Well,
Yeah.
2 years ago, that's like unheard of, even if you
Yeah.
request it, right? So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
So
it
that's
feels
good.
like now, but now the entire industry has kind of proven that this is viable. People can work like this.
Yeah, artists are actually responsible people that can
Right?
actually get the job done, right?
Who would have known?
Go
Yeah.
figure. I'm sorry. Anyway, I just, I've been working for a long time and I've been through lots of different work environments. And so it's always interesting to kind of see that. But anyway, let's get to talk a little bit about the project, how it came about. And I'm so fascinated with the initial, pitch that Manny had kind of came to you with, and the early stages, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the why and the how and all that cool stuff about the project.
Yeah.
Right? I'll
Yeah.
let you if you have anything to share on the screen, I'll let you guys take over on that. If not, we can just start talking about it now.
Sure. Yeah, I think I can start with basically a couple of months ago, Manny got in touch with me. He was asking like, "Hey, what do you think about doing this kind of fluid course that we were kind of planning on CGMA?" And actually, when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," because I think over the course of my career and even from university, I've kind of had kind of the educational part of it is always something that interests me. In university, I was one of the PAR leaders. It's peer assisted learning. So it's kind of like a program in our university to teach the previous year's students with the current knowledge that we have to kind of help them grow. And I think even at work in the past couple of years, I've kind of done a couple of training sessions, and I did like one Houdini user group in London. Shout out if anyone from London actually went to that one a couple of years ago for Pinwheel, which was Christopher Robin doing the Pooh movie. But yeah, so when I heard that, I think it was like something that kind of interests me, and we kind of got into talking, and straight away we kind of had similar ideas on what to sell and what to kind of develop for this course. That's kind of going to be quite unique, in my opinion. So I think the focus for the course, even though currently we're talking about the final piece, the marketing piece and all that stuff, the whole idea from the beginning, me and Manny was talking about is basically to create a course that's kind of comprehensive enough to expose a lot of people to different setups of water. Because I would say water is probably one of the trickiest one to do in CG or in Houdini, especially, just because there are so many different types of fluid in general. You can go from like small scale blood into, I don't know, crown splashes to like huge fountains and waterfalls, or ships going around oceans and all kinds of stuff basically. So I think our goal was to try and to expose students with as many different experiences as possible, and a lot of it has to do with hitting roadblocks and actually failing a lot of times, because fluid takes a lot of time to master. And if you follow tutorials, or a lot of tutorials out there, right, if you just download tutorials, it's going to tell you, okay, put this thing here, put this number here on this sliders, and then you get this, let's move on, kind of thing, right? But what I'm trying to do is to basically expose you to a couple of different ideas, and then you can kind of take that setup or initial idea from that and develop that into your own reel. So by the end of it, hopefully you wouldn't have 20 people with the same kind of camera and with the same kind of reel coming out of it, right? You would develop something out of it that's kind of a bit different. And I think that's the base idea from the project. But then obviously you want to implement that ideas, the small development tasks basically, into a wider project, which is where kind of me and Phillip collaborated together. and that's kind of how it started basically. So me and Philip, we worked together in Suicide Squad together, the second one, and we worked together quite well. So I was like, "Yo, help me out on this," and yeah, Philip's in, and it's I'm really happy to have him on the project.
I'm super happy to be there, man.
That's great. So we'd love to see maybe a little bit more about maybe in this next few minutes, maybe some highlights about and maybe with some visuals that you've provided.
Yeah.
To kind of walk us through a little bit about some of the parts for this amazing project.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know if you can see them. Cool. Yeah. So I think when we started, the idea was obviously to create this marketing piece, the big project to kind of encompass all the little things that we're going to develop. But basically, in any project, we want to simulate kind of like a production environment. So me and Philip kind of went through together to take a look at references. So I'm going to play this through basically and try and decide what elements from previously done movies or just real life in general that we can implement into our project kind of thing. So the first thing we looked at, obviously there are different scales of water. When we say big, it's always how big, what does that mean, right? Is it like 2-story high, or is it an entire mountain being destroyed kind of thing? And I think having looked at a couple of different ideas, we kind of settled on the current scale, just because when you go say quite big, I'm going to go ahead, I think a bit forward. When you think about big water, you might think, oh, 2012, that big movie of a tsunami destroying the Himalayas, right? But when we take a look at that, it's basically a lot of it is driven by a shape geometry, almost like a deformation geometry. So it will look cool. It will obviously look epic, but the technique that is involved is kind of limited in our opinion. So we're trying to kind of maybe scale that back a little bit closer to what we get in the beginning here in this reference. So it's almost like 2-3 story high maybe, and you get a lot of different elements. You can kind of play around with the white water, the debris, and kind of integrating different elements into the project in that sense. And I think that's what we try to emulate basically on the project.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah, Philip, if there's anything else you wanna
No,
add?
I completely agree, and I think this is kind of it showcases more of the creative problem solving than just having this giant piece of mesh that we're just adding elements. I think this is more of a wider showcase of problem solving and various challenges to overcome in this kind of approach.
Yeah, and I think speaking of challenges, I'm gonna start kind of showing a couple of iterations that we did in the early days. So I think looking at the type of effects here, we started kind of blocking out the environment. So Philip kind of got a bunch of these assets and kind of laid out the sort of layout and timing that we want. So in the beginning, I'm kind of just dropping out a couple of quick tests, super low res, just kind of setting things up, and we kind of iterate that way. Actually, one of the things that we found quite useful, collaborating obviously from home and reviewing every week kind of thing, is we use a couple of third-party softwares. Obviously, it's not sponsored, but we quite like Frame.io. So actually, I'm going to show that to you now. So we use this to kind of simulate dailies environment. So this is something that I would definitely encourage in the class. So obviously you would send videos for reviews and stuff like that, but with using Frame.io, you can track versions, you can kind of roll back to different things, and I think that is something that's quite useful in iteration and developing your effects. So you can always go back and kind of look back and compare versions and things like that. So this is kind of how we run things every week. So me and Philip would kind of call in together and just talk about this, and you can kind of draw in and put in notes and like, hey, this is kind of the timing that we like or the timing that we don't like kind of thing. But yeah, so that's kind of the initial process from it. And I think a couple of other versions we can talk about in the next probably talking point. But yeah, so we kind of started off basically to block out the general feel and the timing, and then try and utilize that to push basically what we can within the resources and the time constraint that we have.
Yep. we can also design the layout and the camera work to work in our favor. Kind of like, okay, so where would the body of water start? Where should we emit it? Can we hide it behind something? Like those kinds of questions that would just save us a lot of trouble. Would basically save us a lot of time in the end to just kind of figure that stuff out in the planning stage and layout stage. It's just it's a nice thing to do.
Yeah, so I would say I think when starting a project this size, it is important to know your brief. So you got to be clear what you want, the kind of frame range you want, the scale, and all that kind of stuff, and be clear about everyone involved, right? Like what kind of constraint that you have and how you're going to tackle that and get the best result possible.
Houdini's been around for a long time, and it's come through a lot of different evolutions. And Houdini is also not the only, fluids creator, so to speak. I mean, have you ever worked on other packages, competing packages? And can you speak to some of the differences in the workflow that make people want to work on Houdini more?
Yeah, so I actually started out in Maya, like a lot of I think artists in the past maybe 10, 15 years. So we did that for a while in production, and I think in a lot of the big VFX houses, maybe even like a decade ago, we always have our own tools. Like MPC had their own for like fluid, for crowds, all that kind of stuff. Same with DNEG, MPC, Frame Store, and ILM even. But I think in the past maybe almost a decade now, there's been a huge shift to Houdini, and you can definitely see kind of the resulting quality in actual movie outputs is actually quite different. You can see the improvement and just the fact that it's quite procedural. You can do a lot of things very, very quickly, and it will save a lot of cost basically. And I think from then on, everybody's kind of slowly moving, and it's almost to the point where it doesn't make much sense not to use Houdini. And the application is quite wide as well. It's not just effects, because nowadays, even at work, we use that for crowd, we use that for creature effects, cloth simulations, hair, all that kind of stuff. Even environment is using that now on a project that I'm on right now.
Yeah, hardware's pretty come a long way too. So I'm sure that's helped a lot of some of the working in, I guess, not maybe close to real time, but being able to cash out, being able to see the simulations and how they're responding. So I bet that's also been a big part of being able to do more. I remember back when I was doing Maya, we were on SGIs and and we were working on the Red Hat operating system, and processing power and a lot. It's changed a ton, and it's made world-class effects gettable. In our own homes. So I think that's one of the biggest things.
For sure. So, I think one thing that even to maybe 3-4 years ago has changed is, for example, distributed sims in Fluid. So I remember a couple of years ago, I was helping out to test how to distribute sims, or a humongous sim that you can distribute into different machines. But now we were looking into this again, and our solution is like, just chuck it on the 250 gig machines, right? Like there's no point worrying about network connections and splitting your network into the farm, all that kind of stuff, and then having issues with the velocity interpolation, all that kind of stuff. Nowadays we just say, chuck it into high memory machine and you're good to go.
We had one scenario on Lost in Space Season 2 where we created an infinite waterfall, like in length. So we actually created a 1 kilometer strip that we repeated and changed some stuff on. And if we didn't have distributed sims and that kind of technology, that task would have been immensely more difficult to get around.
So if I'm learning Houdini, I know that there's a special language and abbreviations and semantics that go along with being a Houdini user. When you were first learning that language, so to speak, was it intimidating at times? Did you sort of feel like you were not in the club yet?
I honestly didn't think it was that way. Obviously there are a lot of abbreviations like pop, subs, dops, all that kind of stuff, and every year they're adding 2 more, right? It can get quite scary, and I think a lot of people are always saying that when they're starting. I started from a different software, will I be able to pick it up? But there are a lot of Houdini community, I think in general, is very active and they're very helpful. So I think if you really want to pick it up, you definitely can pick it up. It's a matter of perseverance and putting in the time kind of thing. And I think the reward is, quite beneficial, especially nowadays.
Yeah, especially being able to communicate and make sure you're on the same page. And, there's a lot of benefits to that. So I'm sure then the next question that I have, and I know I'm sort of blending in a little bit of your presentation time with the questions, but they sort of seem relevant. The learning curve, I'm sure, is a little different when it comes to Houdini or not. Maybe in your opinion, maybe you think the learning Houdini is as gettable as maybe Maya was, or maybe there's just a different brain that you need to have to be able to approach Houdini. So maybe you can speak to that.
I think it's a different mindset to obviously other softwares, but more and more softwares nowadays are, going through this node-based system. They're trying to replicate this proceduralism that Houdini has. So I think that concept is kind of getting dispersed into the community more nowadays. And I don't think it was as scary as, say, maybe 5-6 years ago learning this. And I think the key that I found for me anyway, learning Houdini in the past couple of years, is finding the right kind of environment to learn in. So obviously I didn't learn it by myself. I have a lot of colleagues, and I was in this community at work as well, just trying to figure things out together. And I think that helps a lot. Obviously, when you hit a roadblock, being able to ask people around you and get pointers that way, I think it's something that's quite useful.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Are you? I want to get back to the presentation part. So I don't know if you had more to share or show based on some of the things that you had shown. Yeah, I'm going to let you take over the reins again, and please continue.
Okay. Let me. Oops. One moment.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, for those who are, I see some of the questions in the Q&A. Definitely want to try to chime in where we can, and we're going to try to save the rest of the questions for the last 10-15 minutes of the Q&A. So I see the list of questions now. Thank you for them.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So I think having started the initial test, we were kind of happy with the timing and the layout that we have. So for example, I think having this curl around the building is something that we kind of designed into the layout, so we can get that a couple of interesting behavior. And the timing, for example, the timing of this gate where the water is kind of coming in at this time, and obviously to the right we get extra emissions from this side, for example. So once we get that, I think the next step that I did was to basically branch away from the simulation, because it's quite a big sim and it's getting a bit heavy. So I kind of branched out and did a couple of tests to figure out basically different parts of the elements. So I kind of looked into the super generic, the wave crash that everyone's doing, but just trying to figure out isolated small setups that we can then roll back into the main setups. And that's how I've always worked, over the years. Just when things are getting a bit too slow, it's very important to be able to iterate very, very quickly, and just to know exactly, all the variables you're putting into your simulations. Because I think the fallacy of trying to be, the Houdini master is, once you learn something new, you want to chuck everything into your setup, and it becomes quite bloated. And at some point you can kind of get confused at all the elements you're putting in. You don't know what's driving into what. And I think keeping things simplified as much as you can is actually more elegant than kind of putting in all these kind of different things into the setup. So that's kind of what I try to do. And having references always helps, and to make sure that things are kind of in the right scale, in the right space. So once I've kind of developed this setups here, for example, this house, it's basically being put into this area here at the back. So a couple of these things here, it's basically those secluded setup that I kind of ported it into the main simulations. And that's basically something that I would definitely promote in your workflow. The other thing that we were trying to do is obviously get more values out of our project. So me and Phillip, obviously we have our full-time job. We're doing this after work on the weekends kind of thing. And, if the simulation is heavy and we're doing it for 120 frames, which is one shot, then, it's a bit of a shame, obviously. And if you're doing this to show people, then, playing it for that long and say, hey, that's kind of it. It's people were like, oh, we want more, right? So we kind of thought, okay, maybe we can mitigate that and reuse a couple of elements. And for example, on this one, we started off with 120 frames, but then we kind of say, if we add 40 more frames, we get 2 more shots for free, and just move the camera around, maybe overlap some of the caches. And that in that way, we kind of tripled our output with not too much overhead in that sense. So that's kind of the thing that we're doing. And for me as well, I think to be able to get to this point on the shot, the important bit is to layer as many things as you can. So if I bring this up here on this guy, like this. So we started kind of blocking up the second shot and the third shot and trying to see what other elements we can add. So in the end, we were doing extra debris, extra destructions, some things that's super, super cheap to do. So actually, if I show you on my Houdini here, for example, we've got floating debris, right? And that's literally just an advection coming in from the fluid simulation. So you got the fluid simulation that's heavy, but you literally instance a couple of points into debris, and you get to add kind of that sense of impending doom into your shot with destructions kind of happening around. And for example, the tower, that it's literally just a simple rigid body sims, but when you're combining a lot of different things like this together, it's definitely adding to the shot and to the sequence in that sense. And I think we're trying to be as smart as we can while keeping costs as low as possible in that sense, right?
Yeah, that was kind of the goal, to see what we can reuse and just be smart about it.
Yeah, and when you're referring to costs, not just your personal time, but it's also, processing time and being able to work with the scene and make it usable. I'm thinking, how much you resisted to say, you know what, I really want to knock those buildings down. I just want to Godzilla this thing, with the water.
Yeah,
because
it took a little bit of restraint to try to, because I mean, who knows? Like,
yeah,
I'm like looking at it like, yeah, they don't build like that anymore.
Yeah, because like we definitely fell into that fallacy, right? We at some point we wanted to add crowds. We were like, yeah, we can get cheap crowds, like just put it in, it'll add to the things, and like let's destroy this building, let's destroy that building, let's add additional water at the back. I think Phillip, you might be able to jump in here, but we used to have the camera say a bit higher like this, right? And therefore we need to do all this water at the back.
Yeah, exactly. And we need to do like where did this body of water come from? Do we need to extend it? Is it an ocean back there, or is it just a big wave coming towards us? How do we do that? And the solution is just, let's lower the camera a bit and don't worry about it.
I love that. It's a cinematic solution to a production problem.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I try to emulate in this project as well is, obviously we're going to try and replicate this in the course, and not everybody has a big setup. And I don't want you to have a huge setup just to be able to do this, right? So keeping things as compact as possible while still being able to produce a good quality result. I think that's more important in this learning experience rather than trying to go all out and bashing your PC for 2 weeks at a time just to sim something.
Now we're starting to get a couple of questions. I know. Let's see. We got Jad M. Just like I figured. I don't know if this relates to what you guys are talking about. Do you guys think a knowledge in math and physics is essential or helpful in designing and solving problems for fluid simulations?
I think it definitely helps. I do find, because I think Houdini and effects in general, actually CG in general, right? It's actually a marriage between science and art, and knowing or having this kind of mathematical background definitely helps. But I think having a balance is more important, because I've seen artists where they're very, very technical. They can do all kinds of crazy solvers and vex code and for loops everywhere, but the result is still not good because you just don't get that artistic eye. And I think, definitely to know and have basic mathematical background helps, like vectors and basically high school kind of level maths to know is very good. But that's something that you can definitely train.
That's cool.
I mean, we had a vector and matrix math course in uni, And I remember saying to myself in high school, like, I'm never gonna use this. Why? I don't have to learn this. And then during uni, I was like, this is actually really good. Why didn't anyone tell me that I needed this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the why don't we have finance classes and budgeting in high school? It's like so fundamental, or anyway, it's just you wonder why they don't have these questions or these classes, and I'm like, yes, they should have it now, and they should have it for effects classes too. It's like, why don't we have that? Yeah, that's great. Let's see. Someone had a question of which OS is better for performance, Houdini, Linux, or Windows? I don't know if that's just one of those, preference issues, or there's real differences in performance there.
I would say Linux is probably more stable. I don't know about you, Philip.
The same. I mean, I guess I don't know too much about Linux, to be honest, or like the works of it, but I guess there must be a reason why all of the production companies are using Linux for its stability and it's quite like cost efficient in terms of memory usage and all of that jazz.
Yeah, but I think even on Windows that I'm using at home, it's completely fine for me.
It's doing it. So
yeah.
Yeah, and just on that question, just a related one for me is like, does it really matter if you're working on Linux and someone's working on a Windows and trading, or is that a real issue in terms of operating systems and sharing those same operating systems while you're working in production?
No,
especially remotely.
Yeah, that's fine because we're passing in the same data, just VDB, BGOs and all that. So Olympics.
Yeah. Sean C. Asked the question. He says, do you find yourself mostly working at real scale, or are you scaled up? Flip performance drops quickly to the right of the decimal place with voxel size and particle separation. Excuse me. So we have a really solid, meaty question on the technical side.
Yeah, I think for simulations like at this size, I usually keep at real size. But when I'm doing really small effects, like kind of thing, like wine glass or that kind of thing, or even something that's quite macro, the moment I think I drop to like 0.000 something particle separation, then it definitely start to act a bit funky. So sometimes I would definitely move up by a scale of 10, for example. But I think if possible, try and keep into the right Houdini scale and the right gravity and the right forces. Just to keep it kind of consistent. And I would say try and keep as close as possible to zero origin in your layout, because I haven't had an issue with Flip yet, but with rigid body, for example, I've had issues where if the unit is like 800,000 units away from zeros, then it starts to get funky, basically. So.
Yeah, it gets precision errors when it's baking. It's a mess.
Yeah.
But I think like from a lighting standpoint as well, depending on the studio and the pipeline, of course. Before we moved on to a fully Houdini-based workflow, Maya, when we worked in Maya, we used decimeters, and Houdini, of course, uses meters. So then you always had to export everything and then scale down in Maya. But all of the simulations were always done in real world scale in meters, and then we just scale it post.
Yeah.
Cool. We got a question from Francisco L. All right, and he said, "I saw the trailer. Can you talk about the resolution of the fluids?" I'll just publish that.
Yeah. So we were trying to keep things. Basically, we wanted to see how far we can get without going crazy with the resolution. I think in the end it was about maybe 35-40 million points or something, and I kind of meshed that, and I think trying to keep things as light as possible with the white water, trying to blend that in. But you can definitely go higher, and certainly for usual projects we do at work, we go higher. But we were trying to keep things basically to be able to compute everything in a single machine at a time. And obviously with rendering, we're not batching any renders, anything like that. So
yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the concept of resolution and how that like kind of gets impacted depending on the format and what you're outputting to? Like, what numbers are we talking about here in terms of is it we're 4K screens, 4K pixels? How does that translate to the choices you make on the ground?
There is no real answer to that. I think it really depends on the size of the camera, the distance from the camera, the type of effects you're doing, kind of thing. But yeah, so I think the key for me is just to kind of test it out and see what you could, quote unquote, get away with.
Yeah. Terrific. Yeah, let me go back to some of our questions here. Hannes asked this question. He said, did you use distributed sims on the endless waterfall only for the whitewater or as well for the fluid sim and pressure field?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that. I'll send. Can I post a link? Because I read that question previously. Because what we did, this is talking from a simple lighter, of course. But what we did is that we split up the waterfall into sort of like 7 or 8 slices, and those 8 slices, those made up the entire kilometer of the waterfall. So we simmed just strips, and that kind of just got inherited throughout the sims, and we just simmed elements based on previous caches, so to speak. I'm kind of just rambling here. I'll send you the video. The video is the VES submission that we sent for best simulation for this specific waterfall. They get into some details at least. Where can I post that?
You can probably throw it in the chat,
Okay, cool. Send it in chat.
Yeah,
there you go.
Definitely. All right, what else? We got a lot more questions that are starting to, I know we were supposed to kind of delineate the Q&A, but I think it's kind of morphed from your presentation to the Q&A. So unless there were more things that you wanted to share with our audience, any specific things?
No, I think we can roll it in. There are a couple of things I can show maybe a bit later. But yeah, this is
okay.
Good. I'm liking the
yeah, we're getting into questions. They're interested. It says, Joseph B was asking, what recommendations do you have for just starting into Houdini? Would you go to other programs first as a runway, or could you just make Houdini like your world? Because it's so comprehensive as a software package,
I think if you're starting out in CG in general, then I would say maybe look into the whole CG pipeline and cover, maybe start in Maya, cover modeling and all that, texturing, and then slowly work yourself into Houdini and Nuke, for example. But if you'd like to kind of get into effects, I think definitely jump straight into Houdini. There are a lot of resources. Even CGMA has intro to Houdini, right? So I think there are resources out there that you can kind of jump into for effect specific workflow. And I think the more time you spend, I think the key is perseverance, really, because it can get quite daunting at times when you're starting out. But if you just keep at it and find the right people around you, find the good resources to learn, I think there's no reason for you not to jump straight to Houdini.
Okay, cool. We got a couple of questions related to the class itself from Ken H. All right. Hold on. And it basically wanted to get a sense of if you're in the class, are we going to be provided with the assets? How much are we building in terms of the effects? And then how much, can you walk us through a little bit of some of the course expectations for student?
Yes. See, that's why I like going to Q&A, because it's actually showing what I wanted to show.
There you go.
So the class itself, we'll definitely have a couple of assets. For example, the dragon that we see here, that's going to be included because that's a custom thing that we set up for the course. The houses for the marketing piece, that's something that we cannot include, unfortunately, because we got that from Kitbash, and due to the copyright and distribution thing, we can use it for commercial purposes, but we cannot give it out to people. But I will create some kind of proxies on the layout that we have, and that can be your starting point. And besides, the whole idea of the course itself is to for you to then possibly design your own masterpiece. So the course itself is going to be split into minor and major projects. So every week we will cover a topic, right? And actually, I do have my slide here in here. So every week we will actually cover each topic per week, and from that topic we will talk about a couple of assignments. So you have a minor assignment and a challenge assignment every week. So minor assignment is something that I would recommend you do, and that would kind of help you to get into what we've learned and develop that effects. and the challenge one is something that you can kind of develop after maybe you finish, or if you have some spare time, into something that you can put into your show reel and kind of make it unique, basically, from the concept that we've got here. And that's the same thing for the major project, which is the week 5 to 8. Actually, we're doing a bonus week on this course. We're doing 9 weeks, where on the 9th week, we don't have any lectures. It's going to be basically just me, Q&A, and kind of debugging. If you have issues or any feedback you need, I'm going to be there for the 9th week. But basically, from week 5 to 8, that's something that I want to, if possible, for you to maybe design your own layout, design your own. If you have your own ideas, we can talk about it on week 4 on the Q&A session, and I can kind of guide you to help, so that at the end of it, everybody's kind of got their own result, right? We don't want to basically have everybody get the same thing at the end of the project. So hopefully, by doing this and by learning from the first 4 weeks, you can then implement that into basically anything you want in that sense. Within this course, we will cover so far more than like a dozen, almost like 20 plus different scenes and setups that you can basically, the scene file that I've built here for the course, you'll definitely get. Asset wise, if it's if it's relevant, it will be given. But I think most of the time you should just do your own thing and take the knowledge instead and implement that into your own effects, kind of thing.
Terrific. That's great. And we had a couple of questions about, I guess, if I was a student, because you obviously came through, you did a lot of studying prior to entering the field, and then the education continues once you're on the job. So, if I'm learning with CGMA, I mean, what makes this masterclass unique compared to other Houdini water courses out there? Because obviously there's, places that, offer this.
Yep.
What's the difference, do you feel?
I think this is the difference, what we're looking at here. I think I've just read the question again from Keen, and, he was worried about the workload and what the course entails. And I think it can look a bit daunting, but again, I'm explaining everything in a very contained, quick setups, right? Like, for example, the boat or the fire hydrant, that each exercise will explain a very specific workflow that you can make as heavy as you want or as light as you want. But that's what's different about this course, is that we will talk about a wide variety and then try and implement that in a production environment. I know a lot of different tutorials that's following the similar format will focus on, say, one very specific water type, right? They will do, let's do this for 8 weeks, and you'll get one super huge, super heavy thing, and that can get quite challenging, especially if you have like simulation time added up and meshing time and all that kind of stuff. So I think the uniqueness of this is that you will get exposure to a lot of different things, right? Because the scale or the challenges from doing wine glass like this, or the challenge to doing a waterfall like this, it's almost like a completely different effects. And I think having that exposure and having me supporting basically, and I'm going to help you out on the Q&A, on the feedback session, and we'll treat it as if each effects here is a shot or a brief from a supervisor, or maybe a freelance job from the client. We'll treat it like a production. And I think that's something that could be quite useful when you're kind of going ahead out of this course to, or hopefully, do your own gigs.
Well, excellent. There was a question from Hannes G about rendering, and maybe you can speak to that. Might be Phil's area. He said, do you try rendering the whole scene with the GPU renderer like Redshift? And if so, what was your experience with it? Or maybe use something else?
We tried to. In this project, we used Arnold, because that's the render that I'm most comfortable with using. We tried doing the GPU route, but the whitewater in this scene is volumes or VDBs, and the sort of GPU development from Arnold, it's just too much for the memory to handle in this kind of scene. It's a lot. If we were doing a smaller piece, like a more contained piece, then we probably could have gone full GPU. But in this instance, it was too memory heavy to do it, so we had to go full CPU instead.
Cool. Excellent. I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, if I was considering taking the course, what level of proficiency do you believe is required before entering your course? It sounds like to me this could be, um, you know, considered an intermediate course, but maybe you have a point of view on, that. Okay.
I think it will be good. I think this is kind of tying into the other questions about having do I need to know Vex, HScript, or Python, that kind of stuff. And I think it's good to be familiar with it, with Vex and Wrangle and VOPs and all that stuff. But I would say this is probably like late intermediate, early advanced course to know. So if you've done a couple of DOP simulations in DOP, if you've done basic effects in Houdini, or maybe you've done a lot of Pyro, you haven't done a lot of Flip, this could be the kind of course for you. But again, if you're very determined and you definitely want to get into all things fluid, we are starting from beginning, right? Like on this one here, we're starting from a very simple basic tank, kind of leveling up into basic emissive, and then something that's a bit more bigger and bigger, basically.
Well, I was going to ask if you had, because there's so many different directions the questions can go. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your meshing workflow. Do you use standard fluid surface? Do you do your own meshing?
I think it really depends on the type of effects you're doing, depending on the distance of the camera as well. I try to stick as simple as possible and see how far we can get away with it. But we will cover a bit about meshing and post-processing, which is, I think, a big part of getting your fluid looking the way you want it to be. So yeah, I think it really depends, but we will cover that as a part of the course as well.
Cool, terrific. In terms of hardware, what are the minimum system requirements that you should have? I mean, to me, in my mind, as big as you can afford, but I mean, there might be some baseline budget-wise that some people are. Depending on where they are money-wise, it might be considered. So if you had some ballpark things you could suggest on that front, or where to emphasize on the specs, that would be great.
Yeah, I think minimum maybe 8 to 16 gigabyte of RAM, just because when you're especially doing whitewater sims or just the meshing part of things, it can get quite heavy in that sense. But as far as I'm aware, you should be able to actually get a virtual machine as well as a part of the course. Obviously, I'm not familiar with the pricing on that. It will be something on top. But if that's a bit of an option. Full disclosure on this one, my home machine when I started was on 32 gigabyte RAM. So it is possible. But yeah, we're going to try and keep it basically as much as your machine can take to an extent. Hopefully, then you can still have fun with this.
So a couple of questions I just wanted to ask with regards to the experience of working in the visual effects field. And, obviously production work is done, with multiple team members. And just there's so many people that are going to be vested in looking at your work. It says, what is the value of the feedback that you get from all these different sources, whether you're working with peers, colleagues, clients, showrunners, etc. And then, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've handled the concept of feedback in your career, because, it can be a challenge sometimes to meet your clients' expectations sometimes.
Yeah, I think on my career so far, I find something that's quite important is to be able to read between the lines, and managing expectations, right? Because when you start a shot, everybody's excited, you get a brief, and you go away and do your thing, right? You show something, and then they may say, oh, this is like not big enough or not fast enough. Sometimes when they say, can we get it 20% faster, the solution is not to give them 20% faster, right? You don't want to spend a day and say, here you go, I multiplied this number by 1.2. You got to know where they're coming from and knowing their background, maybe. Because if some supervisor comes from comp, they will tend to give comp heavy notes. And that, in a sense, knowing what they expect and knowing how to sell almost like your product, right? Because you're basically in dailies, you're trying to sell your product and convince them that, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm the effects artist here, right? You may be the VFX suit, but I know the effect side of things maybe way more than the supervisors, right? To an extent. And I think being able to know what they expect and manage that expectation is something that's quite important. And I think I personally would want to run this feedback course on the Q&A every week in that sense, right? I would hope that you would not only give me your videos of your work and maybe try and present it. We can run the Q&A almost like a daily session, and I can simulate that kind of environment. I don't know, Philip, if you have anything else.
No, this is perfect. And I think one thing also that comes with experience is that if you're coming across something that you feel like won't work, say that you've gotten a note from your supervisor or the client saying we want to do this, and you're trying a bunch of stuff and it doesn't really work because of reasons. I think it's very important for you to acknowledge the problem, but then come up with a few solutions. So like, this is not going to work, but I suggest that we do this and this instead, because that would kind of address the note, but in a different manner. That's very doable. I think that kind of approach to problem solving is going to be super appreciated by anyone, and it's just going to bring smiles to all of the faces.
Cool. Terrific. We had a Cinema 4D user here who's trying to get into Houdini. I don't know if any of you guys have worked at Cinema 4D, but either way, they were wondering if you guys had any recommendations or experience with primer courses to get enough familiarity with Houdini, and where a student could start branching into sim work, etc. And there you go.
I'm not too familiar with the other courses within the CGMA library, but I've looked at the Intro to Houdini course, and based on that, I think it's probably exactly what probably you probably need as a primer course, because it will cover all from the basics of like the modeling part of in Houdini into, I think it will actually cover a bit of river fluid as well in there, and you will do some destructions, and I think having exposure into just doing simple setups with different systems in DOPS, like pyro, hair, and all that kind of stuff could I think will be the way to go.
Terrific. I was going to ask you in general, this is a little bit of a broader question. And I think this is sort of like for anybody entering this business. What do you think of the characteristics that make a good VFX artist? And what problems should an aspiring VFX artist look forward to resolving? Since that's pretty much what you've been hired to do.
Yeah. Philip, you want to start first?
No, I do not. Can you start?
Nice one. No, yeah, I think a good VFX artist, like I said before, is about problem solving, right? You're there, you're hired to do a job, and maybe you would. I've seen a lot of artists, especially when they're just coming into the industry, they would come in, they do their thing, and then they do the notes, right? Like multiply the radius by 2 times, and then the next daily they'll be like, "Hey, this is it, approve it," or what do you think? But I think what differentiate people that will move faster in their career is that when you get a note like that, then you could say, "Hey, I've done this radius 2 times like you asked, but I feel like they're moving too fast now, so I did another versions that's maybe half the speed," kind of thing. And to me, that definitely is the key, and being able to show your supervisors that you're kind of passionate and you're there to help them solve their problem before they even think of it, kind of thing.
We have the word that we like to use for that is just ownership. You're taking ownership of your shot, and kind of like you're caring about it, and not just the stuff that you're outputting, but also maybe stuff that comes from other departments. Like, what can I do to use their assets and the stuff that I've been provided to take it to the next step, and kind of just think about it in a broader scale than just, because at the end of the day, everyone is working towards the same goal, right? We're all a team, and just trying to think about it in that broader sense, I think is just gonna do wonders for you and your career, and also being humble. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I think this currently might be a bit out of my scope of like knowledge or anything. Just if you come up to your lead or whatever and say like, I think either I would need a bit more time on this, or I would have to do some research, just kind of acknowledging your shortcomings is also just a fantastic way to show maturity. And like all of these like small things is just gonna show that you're very dependent and just a great person to work with in general, I think.
That's excellent. We're starting to wrap up questions, and there was a question posted here about the nature of the courses in terms of the pattern. And I think this is one of the separating differences at CGMA. He was asking about what does a weekly class look like? I mean, how often are they going to meet with you? What the level of correspondence is going to be during weeks 1 through 8.
So the current format, you will get the week's video. You get the basically the most of the week to watch it, go through it, and kind of start the assignments and your development. You would then submit a result, either a play blast or a recording of the work, and I will send a video feedback, individualized video feedback, one-on-one into each of you, with based on the work, and then we would also have an hour Q&A every week that I would hopefully want to run almost like a daily. So if you feel like you have an issue, you have a roadblock, you want to kind of ask me about it, we can kind of have it within so that everyone can kind of have a look maybe. Or if you prefer one-to-one, then feel free to message me, and whenever possible I'll try and reply, obviously. But yeah, if you have any issues, definitely put it into the weekly video submission and I'll give feedback that way. But if there is something urgent, pop me a message. And
terrific. Well, do we have any final thoughts about anything that we can do? Because I just looked at our time. We're just a little bit over an hour into our webinar. I'm so grateful. Just if you had any parting thoughts for our webinar attendees.
Yeah, actually, there are a couple of questions here we can kind of answer quite quickly.
Yeah, if you have more time, definitely do that.
I'm happy to roll in.
For sure. Let's do it.
The Arnold and mantra rendering part. Philip, if you want to.
I mean, the stuff that we'll teach is gonna be Arnold. My goal is to show the techniques that I will be showing is hopefully gonna be render package agnostic. So if you want to do stuff in Mantra, you will hopefully be able to translate these techniques over to Mantra or whichever renderer that you're using. I'm hoping to teach more techniques rather than Arnold specific parameters. I need to get back to you regarding license. We might, let's see. Is there a way to get the information? Wait, who posted this? Was it Brian? Yeah. Is there a way to be sure that we get back to Brian with the answer on this?
We can definitely try to get the question. If we get his email. Let me I'd have to find a way to answer. Do you mean like after the webinar?
Yeah, exactly.
Or shoot me a message on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think that might be the best way to do it. There you go.
I'll get to you.
Fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, and I think a couple of the tests that we did, for example, on the wave crash on the houses, I did that in Mantra as well. So we will have a bit of that Mantra rendering side as well within the course. Compositing wise, I think that's something that's maybe just going to cover the basics, right, Philip?
Just the basic, like what kind of stuff. Basically from a lighter standpoint, what would be nice to think of when you're exporting stuff. We're probably going to show like some AOVs, some passes that would be nice to render so that you can have more control in comp to tweak stuff to make it look even prettier. So basic stuff basically.
And I think, if I may, there is one question about velocities and doing some kind of demo, and that's I've got something kind of popping up here on my screen. If you don't mind, I will take like 2-3 minutes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's someone wanted to see a little bit of a demo. I was going to ask, but some overview how you're going to scene. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We love show and tell here.
Let me see. Can I start my screen share? Can you guys see my screen? Yeah, cool. So I think one of the interesting techniques that we did on this particular one is when doing rivers in general. So I will show you, for example, this thing here. So when you're doing water simulations or rivers in general, like this kind of thing, it can be quite tricky to control the behavior of your simulations and the flow in general. For example, on this guy, we had quite a hard time trying to get the not super fast river moving, but also kind of you still see the definition and behavior. So I think that's what I wanted to kind of show you today on this one. See if I can quit here. For the river part of this simulation, one thing that you can try to do is if you take a simple grid, basically, I'm going to hide this, and basically scatter points into your grid, like so. And if you inject a couple of point velocities in here, display not updating, I will go. So then what I did basically was to scatter a bunch of spheres, inject velocity to them, and you can actually pass them through a very simple pyro simulations here. So this is just a basic simulation. You set that into 2 dimensionals instead of 3 dimensionals. And if you play that through, you would kind of get a 2D slice of a fluid simulation. You can add that into your collision. So if I have I scattered a bunch of spheres here. So imagine if, say, you're doing a river, right? This can be rocks or bridges or whatever. You can add that into your simulation that way. And then that should then kind of interact and create that nice flow that can be quite tricky to get from your simulations. So then if you get something like that going, and basically, let me visualize that this way. So you can then feed this velocity from the pyrosim into your flip sim. Obviously, you might want to modify the velocity with a bit of code to basically say, don't inject too much at the end, because you still want it to look natural, but more of a guided simulations rather than being advected fully. So that's quite an interesting trick to use to try if you have like a river simulations kind of thing that you want to add detail to. You can mess around with the scatter point and have them varying, or you can have them slide around even, just to get a bit more detail in your simulations. So what I did on this guy, I just simmed that. As you can see, this is pretty much almost real time. If I just sim that even right from here. So that's kind of almost real time. Then I just cache that out, and you can pass that on into your simulations. Now, one of the challenges here is that if your ground is not flat, because you started with a flat ground, but on this example here, you get kind of like a tilted floor, then your velocity injection can mess up, because then you would inject velocity on a different part of the surface of your water. So you can then kind of bend it, almost like you're just kind of bending points. So I took the fluid sim here, and I just scattered points into it based on the density, and I transfer the velocity back in. So I get that kind of thing happening here. And then because these are points, you can modify them as much as you want, right? So all I did is just basically ray them into my ground and push them up a little bit, so they're being advected just above the bottom part of your simulation. When you pass that on into your flip sim, I will just go to here. This guy. Yeah, so just pass it on, inject velocity. Then that should kind of help with your simulation behavior, which is kind of shown in that breakdown in the trailer earlier with the second shot there. So yeah, that's just a quick trick that I kind of use sometimes depending on kind of the shots that you're doing. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
That was awesome to share that. Nice to get a little bit of a slice of what it's like to work within the Houdini workflow. And I know there was a couple of questions asking about that. So thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a really, really interesting crowd with a lot of good questions. This might be a good question for Phillip. I mean, do you need a farm to render the stuff? I mean, does it help, or did you do it all on your machine?
Well, I used one of the virtual machines that we got, which was it's a quite nice machine, which we rendered everything on that machine. It took some time, sure, but I mean, depending, well, I guess you tell me. Well, actually, it's up to you if your machine can handle it or not. It depends on how massive your simulation get and the cache, because it's what I mean, a regular work machine is probably what 8 cores, 10, 12 maybe if you have a newer machine. And that's yeah, I mean it's not too bad. And depending on how close you get to the camera, how much volumes, all of that jazz, it's up to you really. But you should be able to render everything locally. I hope.
There's a question about size. Just so you know, so this particular project, that's about 100 to 200 gig per iteration.
Yeah.
So the whole set from the sim, whitewater, and then the mesh and all that stuff. But you know, you can definitely go higher. Maybe not too much lower than that, but something that, and again, depending on the kind of machine that you have, I think we can talk about developing a shot for you for the major project that will work within your, obviously, your machine.
Want to say thank you to you, first of all, guys. Thank you for this, 80 plus minutes of inspiration, information, practical stuff, as well as, industry viewpoint and wisdom and knowledge with regards to working in Houdini, your experiences on this project and in the field in general. And to the attendees, thank you for being a part of this experience by bringing your enthusiasm and questions for the subject matter. My name is Frank Cordero, and it was a pleasure to host this webinar with you guys. Signing off.